I said, girl, why you keep calling? I said, girl, why you keep calling? Yeah. She said, I need a new one. Yeah.
Alright, so before we actually get into the video, I have one thing that I want to talk about first. I got a mic, and it's about damn time. I've been using the microphone on my iPhone headphones, and AirPods this whole time to record my audio. And now with this microphone I can have better quality on my audio, make better content, better videos, and hopefully that will help my growth. So that's the first thing I want to talk about, and now let's get into the actual video. I want to talk about the NBA and COVID-19. I'm not worried about saying COVID-19 and getting demonetized because I don't monetize YouTube anyway. As we know, this season the NBA has been trying to conduct a season outside of the bubble during this coronavirus pandemic, and they've been hit by a lot of complications this season. I don't want to get into detail over the stats or all of the happenings over the season related to COVID, but the recent happening with KD in the Nets-Raptors game on Friday kind of brings this situation back into the forefront. So I want to talk about it. The first thing to talk about is why is it so hard for the NBA compared to other leagues to have a regular season transpire? Let's just compare it to all of the major leagues in America. For one thing, it's a team sport. When you compare it to sports like golf and tennis, those are solo player sports, players not in close proximity with another. You can space out pretty much everybody. Number two, the NBA is a contact sport compared to a league like the MLB, baseball. In that sport, players are pretty spaced out throughout the field, throughout the diamond, amongst one another when they play. There's not much contact compared to sports like basketball and football. And then another factor is the length of the NBA season. Normally an 82-game season, now a 72-game season. And you compare that to a league like the NFL in a sport like football. In that sport and league, there's only one game played per week, compared to the NBA where there's now a 72-game season. Multiple games are being played per week, 3 or 4 games played per week, depending on how many back-to-backs a team has in that week. If a football player has a COVID scare or just exposure or something like that, he could be cleared within a week and he could make the game on Sunday. If that happens to a basketball player, similar circumstances, similar time frame, he's cleared after a week of COVID-19 protocols, he could have missed 3 or 4 games by then, making the impact of COVID-19 on the NBA a lot more magnified compared to other leagues. So the combination of basketball being a team sport, a contact sport, and the NBA having an incredibly long regular season compared to other leagues, this is what makes COVID so hard on the NBA, the combination of these factors. Another thing that I want to look at is the legitimacy of this season. There were questions already about the legitimacy of last season, people calling the Los Angeles Lakers rings, Mickey Mouse rings, the Disneyland Championship. I don't want to go through that again.
Shut your bitch ass up!
There are already questions about it, teams having to play in the bubble for the postseason. Players, teams handled it differently, tested mental fortitude, and a lot of people say that the Cinderella story of the Heat going to the championship was made more likely due to the bubble. That's what a lot of people say. So already coming into this season with that notion, obviously there's going to be a lot more people in question about the legitimacy of this season in its entirety. Last season, the impact of COVID was mainly felt on the postseason. In 2021, COVID's affecting the regular season and the postseason both, because I don't think COVID is going to be cleared up anytime in May or June. And also you have to take into account that there are certain teams getting affected by COVID and contact tracing more often than others. The 76ers had an outbreak within the team that saw them unable to play all of their star players and a lot of their role players. Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving have been affected by contact tracing and COVID-19 on multiple times throughout the season, and that's affected the Nets team success as a whole, you could argue. Kawhi and PG couldn't play in 1 or 2 games because of COVID-19 contact tracing. So certain teams are getting impacted by it a lot more than others. A lot of teams are going to feel like they were dealt an unfair hand. It's starting to get to the point where COVID management is becoming equally important to a coach's game plan or a scouting department of a team. And the last aspect of this COVID-19 battle that I want to talk about, and in my opinion it's the most important one, it's the inconsistencies of how the NBA has been handling COVID issues. So let's start out with the one that sparked me making this video, the Kevin Durant situation that transpired on Friday, where KD couldn't start the game due to inconclusive tests, and then sometime in the first half he was cleared to play, he played, and then he was yanked in the third quarter because it was found that he was exposed to a team worker who tested positive. At that point, Kevin Durant already played a quarter of a full contact, high intensity NBA game. So isn't there possibility for a spread to all of those who hit the floor with him? Shouldn't everyone have been at risk? But there was no cancellation of the game, and the Nets went on to lose that game. Since then, it was announced that KD would have to be held in quarantine for 6 days, even though he tested negative for COVID-19 3 times, which I don't understand. I know tests can be wrong, but if you're so worried about KD being at risk, then why aren't you worried about all of those he's been in contact with? All of those involved in the Nets-Raptors game on Friday. Yet again, the Nets were allowed to finish Friday's game, which was nationally televised, and were cleared to play in the following game on Saturday against the 76ers. I'm not saying one decision is right. I'm not saying it was necessarily right to take out KD and not take out the entire team. I'm not saying that's wrong either. All I'm saying is that all of these courses of action have been contradicting of each other and inconsistent. And of course, you could expect KD was not happy. He sounded off on Twitter. His first tweet was basically his raw reaction saying free him. And then in another tweet, he basically lashed out at the NBA, and that really made me think what he was meaning about that. I assumed he was alluding to the fact that the NBA might be a bit more concerned with their bottom line and making a profit, and their PR, how they look from the outside looking in, instead of the actual player safety and staff safety like they always say they are. Because, like I said, the Nets-Raptors game was nationally televised, and they'd probably lose a lot of revenue if they canceled that game. Another inconsistency I want to talk about is the pre- and post-game behavior that's been enforced on players as of late. Based off of new regulations brought down by the league, teams can't converse with one another or shake hands before the game like we normally see players do before the game during layup lines. The obvious reply that I have, and a lot of people have, is that teams have a lot more contact with each other during the game than before it, because like I said, the NBA is a contact sport, the basketball is a contact sport, so people can't talk to each other and shake hands, but they can foul each other all game. It's an obvious inconsistency. And to that, one might reply or argue that the NBA is in the right here, saying that they are minimizing as much contact as possible to mitigate any extra chance of spread. And to that, I would reply, I'm sorry, but if a player plays with COVID, it is much more likely to have been spread in a full contact game in which players are fouling each other, sweating, and possibly spreading saliva via yelling, constant team communication on defense. The virus is much more likely to be spread in the heat of a game instead of a pre-game communication or handshake. So, this new policy comes off as petty, pointless, and something for PR, like Kevin Durant was alluding to. In regards to the post-game, the jersey swaps was an area of concern brought about by Bam and Kyrie trying to swap jerseys with one another before they were held out by some NBA personnel. And to that situation, I apply the same philosophy. Any virus would have already been spread during the game, so restricting jersey swaps does basically nothing to stop the spread. So again, I say this new policy comes off as petty, pointless, and something for PR. The final inconsistency I want to talk about is the All-Star game. Luckily, last year's All-Star weekend came before the COVID outbreak, but now we're in the middle of a pandemic. Adam Silver and the NBA have agreed to hold the All-Star game on March 7th in Atlanta, and this decision has met stout disapproval from marquee faces of the NBA, young and old. LeBron said he had no energy for it, and Giannis agreed with him, and De'Aaron Fox flat out called it stupid to have an All-Star game.
I mean, if I'm gonna be brutally honest, I think it's stupid. If we have to wear masks and do all of this for a regular game, then what's the point of bringing the All-Star game back? But obviously, money makes the world go round, so it is what it is.
And I agree. The league has been so entranced with restricting the spread of the virus with these petty pre- and post-game policies to restrict any additional chances of putting people at risk, then why would they hold an All-Star game? It has no impact on the results of the season. In the MLB, it determines which league's representatives have the home field advantage in the World Series. For example, if the American League won the All-Star game, then whatever team represented the American League in the World Series would have home field advantage. So it doesn't have any impact on the results of the season. You can have All-Stars for 21, but you don't have to have a game. You can just have an honorary announcement of who is named to the All-Star teams of their respective conferences. but you don't have to have a game. Holding an all-star game enhances travel, increases the amount of uncontrollable factors, and provides additional risk of spread. So why would the NBA think it to be a good idea to follow through with an all-star game?
Hello, I like money.
Yep, money. That can be the reason for a lot of decisions that transpire in the world, and this situation is no different. All-Star Weekends is one of the biggest moneymakers for the NBA, along with opening night, the Christmas Day games, the postseason of course, and the NBA Finals. So not having an All-Star game would be the NBA losing money. What I'm saying is, based off of all of their hyper-extensive COVID protocol decisions that we've seen in the past, it's really not a good look for the NBA to hold an all-star game which enhances chances of COVID spread, because it really just makes them seem like they're doing it for money, and they probably are. Well, actually, they most definitely are. I know the NBA is a business, but it's not a good look to have these type of inconsistencies. If you're going to be all about restricting the spread of COVID, then you shouldn't hold an unnecessary all-star game. As of now, we are roughly a third of the way through this turbulent season. The NBA did a great job in 2020 to conclude the regular season, hold a postseason, and name an NBA champion in the bubble of Orlando. But in 2021, the league has met a lot of tribulations. There's been a lot of inconsistencies with their handling of COVID, and players and fans are starting to question the league's motives. Are they actually focused on the safety of players and staff, or solely driven by handling PR and money? The NBA has got some work to do in order to make us believe that it's the former rather than the latter.
That new wave I was on like last week.